Have you considered a about it?
You're not recording right now, are you?
I am recording, but Tally will edit this out, won't you, Tally? Because you would never keep evidence of us saying things that are horrible.
I consider it every day.
Books. 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 Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that would definitely be seduced by your wife. I am your host, Grace Todd, writer, editor, book gremlin, and joining me again today is our beloved medievalist correspondent and gal about town, Toni. Hi, baby.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. I have been really looking forward to doing this episode because, Gawain is one of the very few pieces of medieval literature that I actually deeply love in spite of myself.
Gawain, as we get in the movie.
Oh, you got to it first. I wanted to talk about Gawain. What is going on with Gawain?
Was that an attempt at doing like a Welsh accent? Did they give King Arthur a Welsh accent for reasons?
I don't know. It's not even quite Welsh. It's this weird pan-Celtic but Gawain has a Welsh equivalent, which is, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's Gwalchmai. So Gawain is I don't know what's going on there. I got together on Sunday with all my medievalist girlies and we rewatched the film, and I realized how insufferable we must be, how horrible it must be to watch a movie with us, because we just did not stop talking the entire time. But every time that would happen, there was just this chorus of Gawain.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, I liked, and we'll talk about this after we talk about the poem itself, but I like the movie very much, actually, although I am willing to concede that it is not an unerringly faithful adaptation of the poem. I think it could be so much worse, of all.
For context, dear listener, Grace and I were chatting and having drinks a couple weeks back when she proposed this to me, and she's like, "Yeah, I was hoping we could talk about the Green Knight film. You've seen that, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I fucking hate it." And she's like, "Oh no!" she's right on the defense.
I mean, in fairness, I know people who like the Persuasion adaptation they did recently, which I think is one of the worst films that has ever existed. So, it's all a matter of taste and how much you love the source material.
See, I haven't seen that, and I also I am not someone who really has any right to talk about taste. I don't know if you've seen that one meme that's I love watching a movie and being yeah, man, that was pretty good. I really enjoyed that movie. And then I go home and find out that it has a 2-star rating on or 2% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and is widely agreed to be the worst film of all time. I genuinely like the 1992 Super Mario Brothers movie. So that should be the benchmark for whether y'all take me seriously in my taste in films.
Yeah, well, but you're qualified on this one, which does change some things.
I mean, I think y'all think I'm more qualified than I do, but yes, dear listener, I am qualified medievalist. I'm an expert. Going to explain to Grace why she's wrong.
Well, what better thing to do at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday than to be told in excruciating detail why my opinions are fundamentally incorrect. So, the Green Knight.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about how we want to get into this, and I realized I don't even know, because the thing about the Green Knight is this is probably, one, it is one of the longest Middle English poems. There are ones that are a good bit longer, but it is one of the longest surviving Middle English poems. And it's probably also one of the most talked about poems. There is so much scholarship on it. Every famous British fantasy guy you can think of, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, they all talked about it. Like, every medievalist scholar has cut their teeth on Gawain and the Green Knight, and like, I don't even know where to start, because I was realizing we could do a podcast just on Gawain. Like, there are so many angles that have been taken. There is so much to be said about it. I'm like, should we start with the poem? Should we start with the context? Do we want to start with the movie? But yeah, where do you want to start?
Let's start with the poem. Let's just, in good didn't read it fashion, let's start with the text and then we'll spin out from there.
All right, so Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a late 14th century Middle English poem. It's probably somewhere like 1370, 1380, but like there's wiggle room there. We don't know. But it's roughly contemporary with Chaucer, and that's one of those things that I think, if you've read Chaucer and then you've read The Green Knight, is a little surprising, because it feels so much more archaic, and some of that is like the linguistic character of the poem. It's in this like very northern dialect of Middle English. There's like argument over exactly where. People argued between Cheshire and Shropshire for years, and now like there's an increasing group of people who think it's Yorkshire, but like it's very northern. There are features that are distinctly northern, like they say they, them, and their instead of hey, hem, and hair.
Okay.
There's this thing, like, I don't know if you read, I know I sent you the like broad view side by side. I don't know if you read the Middle English or the Modern English, but
I did not read the Middle English. I did not read the Middle English.
That's fair, because like Chaucer's Middle English is very recognizable to us, at least like on the page. You hear it spoken aloud, and it's very like difficult to read. But like on the page, it's pretty legible, whereas like the Middle English of Gawain is not.
Yeah, and I would check every once in a while if I, looking at the translation, I would hit a word where I'd be like, what was the original here? Like, what did this come from? And sometimes it would be a pretty clean one-to-one, and sometimes it would be I was like, that is a foreign language. I do not know this word.
Yeah, I'll be honest, sometimes in that one, they even have ones where I'm like, there are closer sense for sense and like word for word, like translations that you could have used. Like at one point they like translate proud in one line as arrogant, and it's like, why not just keep it as proud? Like that is a word that exists. There's also there's this fun thing where if you look at the text, they will use like QU instead of the more like familiar Southern English WH, so you get things like when instead of when.
Oh, yeah.
And this is like, if you hear it, it sounds very like Scottish almost. And this is actually like closely related to the dialects of Middle English that give us modern Scots.
Oh, that makes sense.
And so the poem, we don't know who wrote it. It's one of those Middle English poems that just we don't have any idea who wrote it. It exists in one manuscript. It's Cotton Nero AX2, which is part of the like big Cotton collection in the British Library. It's in a manuscript that contains 3 other poems, Pearl, Patience, and Cleanness, which are generally considered to all be written by the same author. Okay. There's a hagiographic poem in another manuscript called St. Erkenwald that also sometimes is thought to be the same author. And we just call that person probably a guy. I mean, like you said, it's very dad lit. Like, like we typically just call that person either the Pearl poet or the Gawain poet. Pearl poet's a little more archaic because, like, for a long time we thought Pearl, which was this like very dry, allegorical, very religious poem, was the more important poem. And then Gawain started, people got really interested in Gawain, and now a lot of like younger scholars will say the Gawain poet, but like it also just depends who you learn from. All my professors in undergrad said Pearl poet, so I think of them as the Pearl poet.
Fair.
And it is the poem is part of what's called the alliterative revival. So we have this period, if we go back to like Old English poetry and just like older Germanic poetry in general, so like Beowulf, the Exeter Book Elegies, but also like if we go to like Old Norse, the Poetic Edda, or the Old Saxon Heliad, this is the verse that like Germanic poetry is written in. And it's a type of verse in which instead of having rhymes across lines, you have repetition of sounds within lines. And that's
Okay.
the like structural thing. So we look at like Beowulf, for instance. We have like oft shield chafing, shadena threatum, monogam magthum mjordesetla ofte. That like it's this like very drum-like beat.
Yeah.
By about a century after the Battle of Hastings, that has kind of died out and been replaced with more like Latinate, more francophone rhyme structures that are brought in by the Norman aristocracy. And then around the latter half of the 14th century, we see this resurgence, mostly in the north of England, which is an area that is linguistically and culturally much more Germanic in character. So we see this resurgence of alliterative verse. And Gawain and the Green Knight in particular has this interesting structure where it's mostly alliterative verse. Each stanza starts with this like variable number of lines that are alliterative. And then each stanza wraps up with what's called a bob and wheel. And this is where like the last line of alliterative verse starts off a series of 5 lines. It's that last line of alliterative verse and then like 4 short lines with a rhyme structure of A, B, A, B, A. And I want to read out a passage so that people can hear like what this sounds like. This is fairly early in the poem. This is the like first description we get of one of the titular characters, the Green Knight. There halles in at the halle door an aglich meester. On the most, on the mode, on measure he. Fro the sweer to the swang, so swear and so thick. And his lindes and his limbs so long and so great, hath etten in air I hope that he wear. But mon most I got min him to ben, and that the merriest in his michel that mich read. For of his back and his breast all where his bodies stan, both his womb and his wast were worthily small, and all his fetters fallen in form that he had full clean. For wonder of his hue men had, set in his semblant sen. He fared as freck were fad, and over all anchor gren. So we have that clen, had, sen, fad, gren. And there's this fun little thing. You may have noticed a couple times in the poem, there's a motif of drums and pipes that comes up.
Yeah.
Years back, Stephen Fry of Fry and Laurie and V for Vendetta and, general just Stephen Fry fame, wrote a book, I can't think of the name of it, but a book about poetry and about writing poetry. And he argues that the way that this verse goes actually kind of like mediates this drum and pipe thing, because the alliterative verse does this da 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 da.
Right.
And then at the end, the bob and wheel is this like whirl and skirl of the pipe punctuating the drum beat.
I wish when they had taught us about alliterative poetry in, 2nd grade, when you make the poem that's like for your parents, that's like moms must. I immediately lost track of what I was going to do, but it doesn't matter. I wish that they had, instead of being like, it's just a cute thing you do, they'd been like, this is how you write medieval dadlit poetry. And I would have been significantly more interested.
Yeah, that's the problem is I think they had to set you up for the fact that they're never going to teach alliterative verse well. So, if they teach you well in 2nd grade, how are they going to teach you badly in your like freshman seminar? They got to lower the expectations.
I mean, that's fair, but I feel like at a minimum, we've got all this trouble with like little boys not understanding why books are important. At a minimum, if you're like, hey, alliterative poetry is for writing about slaying things, maybe you would get more 7-year-olds who'd be like, you know what? I'm on board with this. Let's give it a shot.
That's fair. Yeah, so the narrative of Gawain and the Green Knight. Gawain and the Green Knight is part of this like broader thing, obviously, that is the matter of Britain or Arthuriana or whatever you want to call it. It's all the stuff about King Arthur and his knights and Camelot. We're like at the point that this is being written, we are like very solidly into Arthuriana. It's been going on for centuries, and it will continue going on until what day is it now? Like Arthuriana hasn't stopped. I'm like, I don't know if I remember. I'm very much like a firm believer that like Arthuriana isn't a thing. There's just Arthuriana. There's not like
it just never stops.
Right. There's not some point in history that I think we can look at and be like, this is when like real elemental, like pure Arthuriana stops, and now it's fake Arthuriana. It's all just Arthuriana. It's all just like stories that we tell ourselves and have told ourselves for over, 900, 1,000 years at least.
Yeah.
Longer if we get like Celtic roots.
We've never stopped. Like, there's never been a point at which we're not like, hey, you know what would be fun? Another Arthuriana adaptation. Fuck yeah, let's get on it.
Right. It is this consistently popular vessel for like national identity construction, moralizing, everything. You can stick it into a King Arthur story and it's great. We're also in a period where like Gawain in particular, the other titular character, Sir Gawain, is like a particularly popular character at the time that this is being written. There is like a whole like series of Middle English romances revolving around Sir Gawain. If anyone ever wants to check them out, the University of Rochester maintains a collection as part of their like Middle English text series that's freely accessible that has like 10 or so like Gawain romances from like roughly the like century around when Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is written. You have like the Turk and Sir Gawain. There's at least a dozen other Gawain tales. It's also part of this like broader thing. It revolves around what's called a beheading game, which is something that has its roots in like Celtic literature. It shows up in the Red Branch cycle, the stories of like Cuchulainn. I think it shows up in the Mabinogion, but like don't quote me on that. I say as I speak into a microphone where I'm being recorded. I'm not an expert on Celtic literature. So we've got a beheading game, which is just basically an exchange in which a character is beheaded in a tit-for-tat exchange of blows, only for that character to miraculously survive and their opponent to then have to stand an equal blow in turn.
I have some questions about the beheading game.
Yeah.
Because it feels like maybe it is one of those things that is the origin of so many riffs on it that it feels kind of dumbly obvious when you're... Because it's like... Every time I see a beheading game, and granted, I don't read as much medieval literature as you do, but it's like, it feels pretty obvious that you should not cut the man's head off because that's gonna lead to unintended consequences. And my question for you is like, is that contemporarily obvious too? And it's like, well, just Gawain got carried away. He's a young man. He's trying to sort of prove himself. Like, would the contemporary reader, when Gawain's like, great, I'm going to cut this dude's head off, would the contemporary reader be like, this seems like a bad idea? Or would they be like, fuck yeah, off with his head?
Like, I don't know for sure. Unlike C.S. Lewis, I try not to fancy that I understand the, like, medieval thought process. But I do think that, like, there is a degree to which at least the text maybe suggests that like someone's got an inkling of this, because like on the one hand, Gawain has this idea in mind that it's like, I don't have to stand a blow if I just kill him. Like what's he going to do? Stand up and pick his head back up. But at the same time, he like jumps in to stop Arthur from doing it. So like, is there this like moment of fear that like Arthur's getting himself into something that he oughtn't?
Right. Well, and is the subtext that the truly chivalric thing to have done would have been to just give him a small blow politely and then been like, tee-hee, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, this is something that my friends and I were talking about the other night, as my friend Jillian was putting it. Like, there is nothing in the text that says that he couldn't have just kind of booped him, that he couldn't have just giving him like a light blow, taking his in turn. I mean, just like like dudes punching each other like as a game in high school. And instead he opts to just fucking behead this guy.
Well, and it feels very much like a young men being incapable of putting down their masculinity long enough to just do the game part of the game, and it just getting too violent and too serious too quick.
I think there's that, and then I think there's also a degree of taking the game too far in an attempt to avoid the consequences of the game, right? Because if the other guy's got his head cut off, you're not going to have to get hit.
Right. If you flip over the chessboard, you can't lose the game.
Exactly.
We've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves, though.
We have, yeah. So our story opens during the Christmas season in the year. There's this really weirdly conflated temporality to Gawain. One of the things we were talking about the other night when we were watching the movie is that like that's one of the things where the movie's like, hold my beer, we're gonna fuck with the temporality even more. But like on the one hand, like it's like in some ways like early medieval in setting, but then also like a lot of the signifiers and the way like Gawain's knightly garb is described in all of this is very like high medieval. So it's like somehow the early Middle Ages, but also the Pearl Poet's own time. We're in the Christmas season, which like in the Middle Ages, the Christmas season is like a 2-week party. You have feasts that run from Christmas Eve through to the Feast of the Epiphany, which is January 6th. It's like when you celebrate the visit of the angry Republicans to the capital. Sorry, yes, the visit of the Magi to the newborn Jesus.
Did they bring frankincense and myrrh to the capital? Because if so, maybe...
They didn't, but the thing that the fake news media won't tell you is that the Magi actually came to Bethlehem to contest Jesus' election as Messiah.
The sad thing is, for the Christian nationalist right, half of them, more than half of them, almost all of them, probably don't know what Epiphany is.
Yeah, and the funny thing with that is that I think that is despite this like very masturbatory like return to like traditional Catholicism and also like Eastern Orthodoxy, like it's all the like signifiers of like we're hardcore Christians without any of the actual like theological or liturgical knowledge.
I've been really enjoying the memes in response to like the tradcaths getting upset at the Pope that are just like, you know, welcome to Catholicism. We believe the Pope is infallible up in this bitch.
But like, I do think even like non-converts have always been like that. Like my parents, this is one of the things that drove me away from Catholicism because I watched my parents and I'm like, y'all think that the Pope is infallible, but you never fucking listen to him. Like you never listen to him.
Isn't that the central charm of Catholicism, though, is believing the Pope is infallible and then ignoring everything he says?
Because I think they're very like, well, you know, but we have our own bishop and he's just like first among equals. And it's like, congratulations on your conversion to Orthodoxy. Like, so so we've got this whole like 2 weeks. There's other stuff in there. There's like St. Stephen's Day in there. There's New Year's. And it is a time when like you get together and you drink and you eat and you celebrate and you give gifts. And like very importantly to Christmas in the Middle Ages, you play games. You take wagers. You engage in like contests of skill and chance. This shows up a lot through the poem. They talk about like, you know, and many of these games, like the references are so oblique that we don't even know what the games being referenced are. But like they're talked about in ways where like clearly the readers of the poem would have been familiar with this game, would have been familiar with this like whatever game of forfeit the like ladies are playing during Christmas dinner that involves like giving kisses to the men when they lose a bet or whatnot. Like they're games that just have not survived, but were clearly well known in their time.
It is such a bummer that, and it's only in the last, I don't know, 200 years that we have phased out the games at Christmas thing. Like, it's just nowhere near as common as it used to be up through even the Victorian era, which I guess partly maps onto Christmas becoming more and more about the nuclear family and not about hanging out with a bunch of people. But yeah, more games, more silly games, more swords.
Not me. I make my family sit down and play long board games that they hate with me because I care about tradition.
Return.
So we're there. We're in Camelot at Christmas. It is a festival of merriment. It is so this is like I'm gonna start slagging off the film now. This is like one of the first places where I take exception with the film as like an adaptation of the poem, because the film is doing this thing. When I was teaching my students earlier this semester about like medievalism in popular culture, and I was talking about how like when you want to create a sense of like real medievalism, a sense of authenticity, you just have to add three things: mud, blood, and shit. And they're all like laughing because like, ha ha ha, Ms. DiNardo said shit. But like, this is this like horrible, like actually ahistorical way in which we signify historical authenticity when we're talking about the Middle Ages. We make it dark and grim and muddy and bloody. And like, I was even like, I was counting off as we're watching the film the other day. I'm like, yep, there's the mud, there's the blood. I was so happy, like in the last like 10 minutes, someone hurls a piece of shit at Gawain. I'm like, there we go. We've got all three.
Bingo.
So like you open in the movie and it's this like really grim. Everyone's like, it's cold. You can like see that it's cold. It's bitter. Everyone's like very quiet. It's very dark. There's like no light coming in anywhere. And like the poem is not that. The poem is like cheerful, happy. Everyone's drunk. Everyone's yelling. Everyone's laughing. The girls are kissing the boys. The boys might be kissing the boys. There's a lot of boy kissing in the poem. There's food, there's drink. You don't have this like old rotting Arthur and Guinevere that you have in the A24 film. You have young, vibrant Arthur. You have beautiful, fair Guinevere. And
yeah, I agree with you. One of the things that I think is a fundamental flaw in the film is how fucking dark it is, which I think is also partly just a byproduct of what's fashionable right now.
Yeah, it's
like movies are just too goddamn dark.
Well, it's the A24ification of the thing. I mean, I can't stand A24. This is my like hot take.
I understand that they did not have electric light, but also they could probably see each other physically when they were indoors. Like, it's not like torches are pretty bright, man.
Well, I mean, even beyond that, like there's a moment early in the film when they're in this space that, like, on the one hand, it appears to be Arthur's hall, but like on the other hand, it has a cruciform structure that is like very clearly cathedral architecture, but there's like no light, and it's like you've got this like high Gothic architecture, except you're missing one of the biggest things that characterized high Gothic architecture, which is just a fuck ton of light. Like, that's how you create the like aura of the holy in like churches. You fill them with light. But A24 loves their darkness. That's why I was so surprised. The like only A24 film I've ever enjoyed, which is Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm like, how is this A24? This is actually good, unlike all the other garbage they produce.
Thank you for alienating everyone.
It's fine. I'm not the podcast host. Now you can like get it's rage bait. It's engagement. People will be like, I hate that bitch you have on the podcast. Like, stop bringing her on.
I will say, to jump ahead a little bit, I did like how bright and luxurious the house that he stays in later was. I was like, yeah, here we go. This is what this is meant to look like, more or less. Like, warm, rich, bright colors,
yes,
big windows.
Weirdly Rococo we were talking about, though. Like, that's one of the places where the temporality is just like, why is this house now like the 1820s?
Yes, we do jump, and also like photography for some reason.
Yeah, I have like, there are things in this film that I'm like, I can kind of see what they're going for. Maybe it's this. I don't know what the they were going for with the photograph. Like, I think some dorky ass little screenwriter was like, hey, did you know there's this thing called a camera obscura? Like, can we can we shoehorn that into this film? But yeah, so we have this happy Christmas feast, and we have Arthur, kind of like young, listless energy, pacing around. And the poem is like, Arthur, in his youth, had this sort of thing where he could not settle down and enjoy his meat, enjoy his feast, until he had heard some rousing tale of adventure or seen some wonder or witnessed a good fight. Like he needs to get his blood boiling before he can sit down and like enjoy the feast. And basically in like response to this, the door bursts open and in rides the Green Knight. And this is another thing that I hate about the film, because in the film he is this like he's so dark. Like he is not in any way overall anchor grain. Like we're talking Wizard of Oz. Like this motherfucker is green.
Yeah, in the film they chose to make him the Green Man, which I actually think is kind of an interesting riff on the sort of overall mythology, especially where like the Celtic mythology and early Christian stuff is kind of braiding together, and the Green Man I think was an interesting sort of character signifier to pull into the film. But yes, no, in the poem he is just green. The bitch is green. But he's also, importantly, hot.
Yes, this is why I have a problem with it. Like there are so many things in the film I could criticize, like the way in which like they've made him the Green Man, but they've also made him less green. The way they made it all dark. The way in which like there's the weird fucking thing with the like letter that makes Guinevere like read the challenge instead of them just talking. But the biggest thing that they have lost is that the Green Knight is hot. In the poem, he is so hot. I mean, I read this little passage earlier to show what like the meter sounds like. There's this line, for of his back and his breast all where his body stand, both his womb and his wast were worthily small. They're saying big shoulders, snatched waist. Like this guy is like built like a linebacker, but he's got an itty bitty waist. Like he is muscular in the right places, he's thin in the right places, his hair is curly, his beard is nice. Like this is a hot man in gorgeous clothes with a gorgeous horse who just also happens to be like 10 feet tall and green, and his horse is green and all of his clothes are green. He is on the one hand the like pinnacle of the chivalric ideal, and on the other hand he is this thing that is like monstrous and other.
Now, in fairness to the filmmakers, do you think anyone would have taken a bright green hottie at all seriously if they had thrown him on the screen? Because I think that would have been a bridge too far for a 2023 or whatever irony poisoned audience.
I don't know. There was in the like second to last season of Star Trek Discovery, there was like the hot like Orion girl that everyone was thirsting over, and I didn't think anyone could ever take Orion seriously again. So like I think we could have done it if we did it exactly right.
I would like to propose that the audience of Star Trek and the audience of theatrical release A24 films are not the same.
I mean, as a like hardcore Trekkie who hates A24, I don't know that I can actually disagree with that statement.
Like, I'm not asking if you personally, my beautiful love, would have taken an accurate Green Man seriously. I am asking if you think the movie-going public would have.
Not the people going to see A24 films, no. But it would have been funny. Honestly, though, I'm like, I feel like there are still better things they could have done. Like, put a Muppet in there. Like, that still would have, like...
That is not the movie they were making.
So, the Green Knight rides in. Arthur, like, greets him quite warmly. It's this very, like, old school medieval hospitality. It's like, come in, sit at my table, eat my food. Like, you're green and that's fucking weird, but I am like a man of manners. If nothing else, come, sit, eat. And the Green Knight's like, no, I've just come here to propose a game. I've heard this is Arthur's court and it's full of the bravest men, and who will engage in a game with me? I have this big ass green axe. It's like brought up that like the only sort of martial thing he has with him is this axe. He's not in armor. He's very clear to point out, like, if I came to fight, I have mail and plate and a hauberk and all of these like things at home. But, you know, I have not come to fight. I have my axe. And he like rides in holding a holly branch as like a mark of peace. So this is something that like one is serving kind of the same function as like a olive branch, but it's also an image that has like distinctly Christian and like Christological imagery to it. Holly in the Middle Ages is like associated with the the crown of thorns. Oh my god.
Okay.
Because it's like sharp and pointy, but then it has these bright red berries that are like the blood of Christ. So he's like, I'm not here to fight. I'm just here to propose a game. Whoever wants to take up the challenge, take my axe. It's yours. This well-wrought, beautiful, like massive axe. It's described in terms that are like very like fantasy axe, not like the actually much more like practical like Danish axes that would have been actually used in combat at the time. Strike me a blow and agree that 1 year and 1 day hence you will come find me and let me strike you an equal blow in turn.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's kind of like, no one like goes right for it. And so he kind of mocks them. He's like, is this not Arthur's court? Surely it's not, because, you know, I've heard of the Knights of Camelot that they're the bravest men and none of you are rising to my challenge. And Arthur leaps up and is like, you motherfucker, I'll do it. And this is where Gawain intervenes and is like, even though I am the smallest and the least and the worst of the like round table, and this is a very deliberate like form of artificial humility. Like anyone reading this poem in the time is going to know Gawain as like one of the greatest knights of the round table. Let me have the honor of taking this contest in your place. And so he tells the Green Knight, he's like, you know, just tell me like, you know, where you live and where to find you and we'll get going. And the Green Knight basically sort of is like, strike your blow first, and then if I still have life in me to tell you, I'll tell you where to come find me, and if not, then there's no wager left to fulfill. So Gawain does what any reasonable person would do in a Christmas game, and he cuts this guy's head off. Like, just full on beheads him.
And that's the part, like we touched on earlier, that is debatably like either he's overstepping or he's doing the clever thing. Unclear, but definitely open for interpretation on that front.
Yeah, my thought is, and I think there's a few markers in the text of this, is that he's trying to do the clever thing. And I think the Green Knight is even suggesting this in the way in which he's like, well, I'll tell you where to come finish the wager if I have life left in me to do it. Like, maybe you'll kill me and you won't have to come find me.
But it's also like, it is not good manners to murder somebody that you invited to eat dinner with you like 10 minutes ago.
It is not, though. Again, this is where like I'm not like particularly an expert on medieval hospitality, but I think arguably the fact that the Green Knight turns down a place at Arthur's table means that he's not necessarily protected by the laws of hospitality. But again, don't quote me on that.
Fair. Anyway, so the motherfucker's head is just gone.
Yes, and he does what every reasonable beheaded person would do. He picks his head up, and his head speaks to Gawain and is like, all right, 1 year and a day from now, come find me at the Green Chapel, my home. And he walks out. So we then have there's a couple like sort of periods of interlude in the poem, and we go into one where like the Christmas season finishes up and like everyone just kind of like laughs off this occasion. Like they finish feasting, they finish drinking, and like nothing for a time is really made of this challenge The like wheel of the year passes. One of the few things I do like about the film is the little like puppet show with the like wheel of the seasons that like spins as time is passing until they get to, I want to say Michaelmas, which is Michaelmas is in September, and it's like the sort of traditional start of fall. It's actually it's a couple days after, or sorry, the traditional start of winter. It's a couple days after the autumnal
Equinox.
Yeah, after, I think, yeah, because I want to say it's September 26th. So they get to Michaelmas, and this is where like everyone in Camelot starts to kind of be like, okay, I guess this is now actually happening.
Oh, I guess we have to deal with this whole consequences for our actions thing.
Right. So Gawain makes his preparations. There's this like scene of him being put into his armor. You know, his clothes are described very finely, very richly. He has this shield. They get part of it right in the film, sort of, in that like on the inside of the shield there's an image of the Virgin Mary so that he can take courage whenever he looks at it. Though we were laughing at the way in which, like, I think because Western European religious art like isn't as like familiar to people, or at least Western European like medieval religious art, it's this weird like Eastern Orthodox icon that is on the inside of the shield. Like, so now we've got like temporality and like locality weirdly conflated. The thing I don't think they have in the film is that on the front it's described as having a pentangle. It's actually the first recorded use of the word pentangle in English, and this is described as being the shield of Solomon, which is like the like sometimes 5-pointed, sometimes 6-pointed star. The Star of David like is ultimately derived from the Seal of Solomon, and it's a sort of like protective talismanic device. It's tied in the poem into like the 5 virtues of knighthood and the 5 wounds of Christ and
Yeah,
all these things.
they have Arthur wearing it as like a necklace, basically. Like they have Arthur wearing one around his neck, but not on Gawain's shield.
Okay, I missed that. This is another thing we were talking about. Is like, so one of my biggest problems with The Green Knight as a film is that like it is, I think, at the end of the day, like we were talking, it's like simultaneously very heavy-handed at times, but then also at times incoherent in what its actual like purpose is. But then there are also these ways in which like there are phenomenal aspects of attention to detail at times. Like one of the like songs a friend was pointing out is in the like fake language that Hildegard of Bingham created. There's the whole thing where like the girlfriend who is made up for the movie is seen like wearing like a belt of bells, and she gives a bell to Gawain. And the thing is, this is probably marking her out as being a prostitute.
Yes.
Who in the Middle Ages had to wear various things that like readily marked them out. Bells were actually not a super common one outside of Italy, but like I think are like visually recognizable for the film. There's Guinevere, you know, who's depicted as like very barren in the film. Her like breast is covered in pilgrimage badges.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and like you know, my friend Jillian pointing out that it's like these are probably pilgrimages to the like shrines of saints who are associated with fertility.
Right.
I don't know that for sure. Like I'd have to do more research, but I also know Jillian tends to be right on these things.
I think Jillian has come up before. We trust in Jillian in this house.
We do. Yeah, so there's at times a lot of attention to detail, and then at times things that are just weird. Like why is it like an Eastern European icon on the shield? He rides out with much like crying and wringing of hands, and pretty much everyone like clearly thinks they're never going to see Gawain again. Like he is going off to die, which is I think a reasonable assumption to make, given that he is going off to get an equal blow for being beheaded.
Goodbye forever, loser.
Yeah. Oh, he his horse is named. That's one of my like favorite things is that like his horse is actually named several times in the poem. He rides off on Gringolet,
Yes.
who is a big, strong horse. And then there's this thing. This is actually one of the more interesting things in the film. Is something that in the poem is actually like elided over and like passes in this moment of occupatio. For those who haven't listened to some of the Canterbury Tales episodes, occupatio is that like medieval poetic device where you make reference to something that you're not talking about while saying that you're not talking about it. So they're very like, it's like a couple lines of his voyage where they're basically like, sometimes he fought bandits and sometimes he fought dragons, and his adventures are too much to tell of here.
Right.
The movie kind of explodes this more, where there's like this scene on like a battlefield where he interacts with Barry Keoghan back, when Barry Keoghan was like the weird guy in A24 films instead of the hot guy before like Sabrina Carpenter or whoever managed to somehow convince America that Barry Keoghan was hot. There's this like, in the poem they reference him riding by Holyhead, which is a town in the Middle Ages, Holyhead or Holywell. In the modern day, the town is Holywell, which is a site associated with the Welsh saint Gwenfrey or Winifred.
Yeah.
And this is a character that Winifred doesn't appear in the poem. There's just the like passing reference to him riding past Holyhead. But then the movie makes this whole exchange with like the spirit of Winifred. But yeah, so the poem really just like skips past all his adventures in a way that like
he gets no exploits.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing is that the movie uses this like extended like image, this extended like sequence of his adventures to like drill in this like line of the like film version of Gawain being like on a deep level a coward. Like he shrinks from almost everything, whereas like in the poem it's implied that he was this like doughty adventurer throughout all of this, but in this way that is, I think, compared to what will happen in the next fit of the poem, meaningless. He's like a doughty adventurer in this very commonplace chivalric way of like, yeah, he fought dragons and all of this. There's no real peril to it.
Yeah, I think the movie, what I will say in defense of the film is that it gives a more realistic and I think slightly more nuanced character building like this is character development. He is learning as he goes. He is slung between his aspirations and the actual sort of metal of his character because he's never had to do anything hard. He's never had to deny himself anything, and he's never had to do anything difficult. He's been having sex with his girlfriend and getting wasted, and he's King Arthur's nephew, which has gotten him a certain amount of access to privilege, but like, he's just a young man who has never had to do anything of consequence, and he's figuring out that that's hard, actually.
Yeah, and
as he goes.
I tend to agree that I think it is one of the things that the film does a little better because, it's funny. When I think of that like opening scene in Camelot, I think of, an author who I have been spending an unfortunate amount of time with his writing because I'm working on a dissertation chapter. I think of in the middle of Game of Thrones, in the third book, I want to say, A Feast for Crows. Maybe it's the second, maybe it's the Clash of Kings. There's this bit when Catelyn Stark goes to Renly Baratheon's, his like war camp, and they're having a tourney and they're drinking and they're praising each other and jerking each other off and telling each other how great they are. And Catelyn Stark refers to them as Knights of Summer. And it's basically like, you are inexperienced boys playing a game of a thing that you've never had to experience. You think war is a game and war is going to chew you the fuck up and spit you out. And I think there is a little bit of an element of that in that like Camelot feast where it's like a bunch of dowdy soldiers supposedly. But are they? Like they're just sitting around drinking and laughing and telling each other stories of bravery.
Right.
And I think this is like, this gets into some stuff. I've done scholarship on like Gawain and the Squire's Tale in the Canterbury Tales, and like maybe a little bit of a critique that's happening in the 14th century of knighthood, like turning into a thing that is increasingly vapid and like divorced from its martial roots. But that's, I think, again, getting a little ahead of ourselves. So we kind of just skip over the voyage and we get to Gawain arriving at a castle. And this castle, it's described in very grand terms. It's described in terms that does, even in the text, make you wonder if it is grander than Camelot. And I think that's maybe some of what the movie is getting at with this way in which it's like more modern, more rococo.
Yeah, and full of books in the movie, not in the poem. I don't think they talk much about books in the poem.
I don't think they do at all, no. So it's like, it's this massive castle. Everything about it, much like the Green Knight, is exaggerated in stature. Like the palisade is huge, the moat is huge, the gates are huge.
His wife's tits are huge. Sorry, what?
Yeah. We're getting there.
Actually, they were into small-breasted women back then, weren't they? It would have been the inverse.
I don't know. Especially because, I mean, I don't know. As always, the Middle Ages is that thing of like, why do we even talk about this period of like 1,000 years as if it's coherent? So I can't like always keep track of like what's in and out in every like part of the Middle Ages.
Yeah, that's fair. I saw like a TikTok or something the other day that was a bunch of nerds being like, our friend threw like a Victorian themed Christmas party and we all showed up as different chunks of the Victorian era because it was a long one.
Yeah. And that's so much smaller scale than like the Middle Ages. I want to say actually maybe no, because I feel like the Canterbury Tales, which is again roughly contemporary, has some fairly risque jokes about like, I think the miller's daughter in the Reeve's Tale having like large breasts and whatnot.
All right.
Yeah, I think at least like to a more popular reader, big breasts might have been more popular then, but I'm not positive.
You heard it here, folks.
So Gawain rides up to the castle. He asks for and is immediately granted the hospitality of the house, which like contrary to again to the movie where like it's just Bertilac and his wife and Morgan Le Fay in the castle, or I mean there's the like old blindfolded woman who we were like presumably is Morgan Le Fay because that's who the old woman is in the poem, but then at the same time Gawain's mother, who in the poem is Morgause, is also conflated with Morgan Le Fay.
Yeah, the movie had 2 witchy ladies in it instead of just 1 witchy lady. We were throwing in bonus witchy ladies, because why not?
Exactly. And the fact that in the movie it's Gawain's mother, Morgause, that casts the spell that leads to the whole thing would situate her in the place of Morgan Le Fay in the poem, but then there is still an old lady.
Well, one of the things I find really interesting about that swap is it turns it from something that was being done to f with him and more importantly to with King Arthur. It turns from something that makes it a sort of sabotage attempt into something that is done like for his own good, basically. Something that is arranged in order to like push him into being the adult that all of these people want him to be.
Yes, yeah. And I think that does a lot to change the character of the film. And that is, I think, where, in the same way that I'm like, there's no Arthuriana and Neo-Arthuriana, like, for all that I don't like the Green Knight film as an adaptation of the poem, I think there is also a way in which, like, the Green Knight film is doing its own thing and has its own stakes and is making changes in order to tell its own story, and that's fine.
Yeah. And that's why people like you and I get together to discuss texts and also Filmus texts, because we are nerds.
Exactly. Now, of course, my mean point is that I think The Green Knight as a film does the things that it's doing in its own terms badly, but that's a different story.
I like it, and I am going to stand proudly on liking it, and you cannot stop me.
I would never try to stop someone from liking something bad. One, I like so many bad things, and two, as a woman married to someone that I deeply love who is way out of my league, I have a personal stake in people liking things that are bad.
I disagree with you that it's bad. I like plenty of bad things. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's actually quite clever and doing some really interesting things. And by God, I wish they would make movies like that more, because I am so tired of dreck.
I'm just going to point out, audience, no disagreement on my characterization of myself as bad. That's 20 years of friendship for you. So, but so unlike the film, when he shows up to the castle, initially it's full of people, because it is, by this point, almost Christmas again. It's Christmas Eve. So, the Lord of the Castle has all these people there feasting and making merry, and Gawain is invited to join the feast. He's treated as an honored guest. He's given the best of everything. It's very that, have whatever you want, have a drink, have something to eat, have my wife.
Huge tracts of land.
Yo. There's another discussion to be had in another episode, maybe, about the ways in which Monty Python is simultaneously yes, a mockery of medieval literature, but it is also a deeply loving homage to medieval literature that at times does medieval literature better than far more serious adaptations do.
That's always the way.
You find out that half the guys in Monty Python took degrees from Oxford in medieval literature, and you're this makes so much sense.
Yeah, it tracks.
So Gawain stays, I think, for Christmas Eve and for Christmas, and feasts with them, and then he tries to take his leave. He tells Bertilac, thank you for hosting me, but I've got to go. I have a commitment that I have to honor, to be at the Green Chapel, 3 days or whatever hence. I think that there's a note in the Broadview thing. I think it's not the day after Christmas, but there's a day missing. The number of days that he says doesn't make sense based on the day that they say it is, because I think it's St. Stephen's Day, which is the 26th of December, but he says 3 days, which is not correct. And he's but if you would be so kind as to tell me if you know of or have ever seen a Green Chapel. And Bertilac is this is great. Go, you're going to stay here. You're going to hang out with me. I'm going to treat you to all the finery. And in a few days' time, I will set you on the road at 9 a.m, and you will make your meeting at the Green Chapel, because, as it turns out, it is only 2 miles from here. And Gawain is thrilled. He's awesome, I get to stay here with all the food and nice wine and whatnot and wonderful company. And the Lord of the Castle, Bertilac, is to make our passage of time even more enjoyable, I'll tell you what. One, I want you to just stay abed, relax, enjoy yourself, spend time with my wife and the old lady. I'm going to go out with my men. I'm going to go out hunting. And I'm going to propose a game. And games have, again, shown up several times. They play Christmas games. There's a wonderful scene where they're describing Bertilac with his fine mantle on the tip of his spear, playing what appears to be some sort of jumping game where people are trying to claim it as a prize. It's that one insurance commercial with the fishing pole with $1 with ooh, you almost got it. He's we're going to play a game. Everything that I hunt I will give to you. And anything that you should happen to win, any prize you should obtain while I'm out hunting, you will give to me. And it sets off. This is at the end of the day, this is my real problem with the film. There's like one little like chaste kiss in like a scene where it makes no sense, and it ruins it because this poem is so gay. And there's so much kissing that we're about to see. So what happens is over the course of the next 3 days, we have a series of like interchanging scenes of Bertilac out hunting and Gawain interacting with Bertilac's wife. So like on the first day, the lady of the house, she comes into Gawain's room where like he's like, I don't know what to do about this. He like pretends to sleep for like way too long and then finally wakes up with this like, there's a girl in my room. What do I do? And he spends some time like chatting and talking and entertaining Bertilac's wife. And again, like he is in his room. Like he even like he's like, please, like, let me rise and dress and then I'll entertain you. And she's like, no, I'm going to tuck you into your bed so that you can't get up and you're going to entertain me here. It's very
like, I'm going to trap you here.
Yeah, it's very like flirtatious on the face of it. And like at one point in this interaction, she's like, I've heard that you are Sir Gawain of such great renown, but surely you can't be because, no knight as renowned as Gawain would have treated me in such an unchivalrous manner as you have. And he's very like, what the do you mean? And she's like, well, should a knight not kiss a lady? Is that not the chivalrous thing to do? And he's very like, of course I will kiss you if that's what you want. In fact, because I am so obligated to give you what you want, ask no more than a kiss. There's very much this like, girl, I'll f you if you ask. So like, let's keep it at a kiss. He kisses her. At the same time, the Lord is out hunting. There's this like massive hunt scene. The first day he's hunting deer, and it's like a fucking slaughter.
Yeah, this is where it turns into dad lit, is that like this whole sequence is interspersed with the longest, most detailed hunting scenes imaginable, where they are describing how they cut everything. They are describing how they butcher the game. They are describing whether or not the dogs get pieces of it. And it just...
Yeah. I mean, there's like the description of like mixing like the blood and offal with bread for the dogs. It's like ye old kibble.
Yeah, like just this whole thing that happens in contemporary dad lit where mid-plot they'll be like, hey, do you want to hear in intimate detail about this like expensive car? And you're like, not really. And they're like, too bad.
Yeah, and so the thing that's interesting, I think, is that there's kind of two things going on. One is that, like, yeah, this is dad lit. Like, this is, again, where I'm like, I say the person who wrote Gawain and the Green Knight, but, like, it's definitely a guy, right? Because, like, I mean, I don't know. I guess, like, in the modern day, this is not necessarily perfectly legible. I mean, I'm a girl, and I was talking to a friend about getting hunting licenses and going squirrel hunting next month. But like,
sure,
in the Middle Ages, this is a masculine pastime. Noble women might like come along on hunts. They might even occasionally, like with the advent of like crossbows, Elizabeth I, like by 2 centuries later, like Elizabeth I loved to hunt, but what her loving to hunt, y'all can't see the air quotes I'm doing. What her loving to hunt looked like was she would sit there in a nice chair with a crossbow, which she had dozens of, as well as 3 guns, and she would just shoot deer as like trained huntsmen just like drove them in front of her. So we have like a deer drive, like we have dogs baying, like driving dozens of deer into the slaughter. And then, yeah, we have this like explicit scene of like deer being butchered in terms that like clearly whoever wrote this hunts.
Yeah.
Clearly whoever wrote this knows how to butcher a deer. But there's also the like subtext where like these scenes are kind of making explicit what is flirty and implicit in the scenes with Gawain and Bertilac's wife, which is this hunt scene. It is this thing that is actually very visceral and very like carnal.
Right.
And we see that in the hunt scenes, and we don't see that in the like flirtation between Gawain and Bertilac's wife. Bertilac comes home. He lays all this meat out for Gawain, all the choicest cuts. He's like, all of this is yours. What do you have for me? And Gawain comes up and he's like, of course, here's your recompense. And he kisses Bertilac in terms of, like, it's described as like quite passionately, like with all the vigor he can muster. And he even is like, be glad that I didn't earn more, for surely I would give you very this like, you know, good thing I'm not having to, you know, like reporting for back shots. It's every time we talk about medieval literature, we take this podcast a little bit further away from a friend of mine was telling me that she just like died listening to the bit where we were talking about Pasolini's Canterbury Tales showing up on a porn site and the like 30-second long bleep. But yeah, so he like, and I think this is another thing that's really interesting. There's so many like thematic things to talk about in this, but like there's like a way in which like Gawain is kind of like feminized in a way that's like maybe even a little like misogynistic in its like commentary, in the way in which like Bertilac does all this work for him, and all Gawain, who has been like laying around at home in bed eating bonbons, does is give him a kiss. So there's a way in which like Gawain has been feminized. There's a way in which like the whole game provides a context or a pretext within a like homosocial order that is meant to like keep relationships between men from becoming sexual, in which it's like actually created the pretext for it to be sexual.
Right.
But the big point is that there's so much more gayness going on here than we ever get in the film, and that's a crime.
It is a bummer. I feel like they did not have the time. It would have veered things off in another direction entirely, at least from the perception of people watching it. They got right up to the edge. Okay, you're going to make so much fun of me for this. I had apparently hallucinated a whole scene in that movie that I was like waiting for the whole time I watched it again recently. But I could have sworn to God that there actually was a scene where Dev Patel gave the host a hand job.
Oh, no, I think you definitely hallucinated that.
I clearly did, but I was so sure it was in the film. I was so sure that there was like a third beat where after the wife gave him a hand job, he like awkwardly gives the host a hand job. And now I'm trying to figure out where the hell I got this from.
I think you read that on AO3, Grace.
I don't read fan fiction.
Uh-huh.
I have it so vividly in my head, and now I'm like, what awkward medieval-ish handjob scene am I transposing, and from what movie?
Yeah, I don't know this. I mean, obviously, I have seen a lot of like medieval adaptations, and I cannot think of a single handjob scene.
I don't know where this came from. Yeah, so I'm just out here inventing handjob scenes, apparently. No idea where that came from.
Yeah, no, that's not in the movie. Maybe it was the version you were watching on the same website that I found the Pasolini Canterbury Tales on.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Toni and I were having such a great time that we completely missed our cutoff for episode 2, and so we missed the chance to have our usual wrap-up chat. There will be more on the Green Knight, chivalric romance, and its impact on our current cultural climate next week. In the meantime, thank you to Toni for joining me again. She is always a delight to have on the show. And thank all of you for being with us here in the new year. And, as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really use the love. Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, researched, and recorded by me, Grace Todd. Maddie Wood is our co-producer and social media maven. Editing by Tally, a true podcasting professional, and Grace Todd. Our theme song is Books 2.0, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia. Reach out to us with questions, concerns, or academic scrutiny at didntreaditpod@gmail.com.